All right, it's our conscious community and such an incredible time as this. Our job to show up fully present in every moment. And this time that we are here in a human body is precious. These moments to show up fully.
As we move forward to honor our sacred journey here as this collective, we welcome Danny Sheehan to today be updating us, I'm sure, on what's happening in the Black Hills, as well as the title of his talk, FDR's New Deal and Our California Green New Deal. Constitutional attorney, co-founder of Romero Institute, Danny Sheehan. Take it away, Danny.
I want to obviously at the beginning of this set the stage for where we really are. We are, as of right now, 120 days out from the November 3rd election, basically. Donald Trump, as you made reference to, Tatanka, earlier, is at this very moment convening a gathering of over 7,000 people at the foot of Mount Rushmore in the Great Sioux Nation, beneath the four carved faces of the presidents, two of whom who were slave owners, and carved in the mountain by a man who was a close associate of the Ku Klux Klan. This is similar to him last time gathering in Tulsa right on the eve of the commemoration of the slaughter of over 300 people, the Black people in the community. So he is once again right in the midst of the coronavirus, with a major confrontation going on between his administration and the Lakota people over the effort on the part of the Lakota people to set up safety inspection stations on the public highways leading into their reservations. He has ordered them to stand down, has cut off the federal funding to their local police departments on the reservations, prohibiting them from going to man these safety inspection stations on the public highways to keep people from coming into their territory, because as we know, the Lakota people are among the poorest people in the entire country. That of the 3,300 counties in the entire United States, they have historically, 7 of those counties have been on the reservations in North and South Dakota. So they're among the poorest people in the country, and they are in fact afflicted with over an 80% adult onset diabetes, one of the major vulnerabilities of people. And so their effort to protect themselves against the coronavirus, the administration under Trump has basically cut off the federal funding for most of their police department in response to Kristi Noem, the extreme right-wing governor of the state, who had kept the South Dakota legislature in extra session to pass a law, as you may remember, called boosting rioting, pursuant to which they were threatening to fine and put in jail anyone who gives any even indirect aid to anyone who comes into their state to protest an oil pipeline. Very pointedly, they're not at all subtle about what it is that they're doing there. And she is the one who has absolutely refused to recommend wearing masks in the state. She's the one that refused to advocate social distancing, even in the major meat plant over in Sioux Falls, where over 500 of the employees were all coming down with the virus. So this is the woman Cindy Noem, who is now being supported by Trump, who has come into her state to do this rather ridiculous 4th of July ceremony at the foot of Mount Rushmore, and is engaged in ordering the firing of fireworks, even though the national park authorities have said that there's over a 60% chance that there could be a major fire started by the fireworks. So this is a stark metaphor for what is going on now in the country, as the two major oil pipelines, one on the easternmost border of the Great Sioux Nation, the Dakota Access Pipeline, and on the western border of the Great Sioux Nation, the Keystone XL Pipeline, are all basically being confronted with major federal court orders commanding them to undertake a full environmental impact study before they're allowed to go forward. Our Lakota People's Law Office has filed, as we talked about last week, a major amicus brief in the federal court in Washington, D.C., demanding that the court issue a court order shutting off the flow of oil through the Dakota Access Pipeline, since the court has already ruled that it was unlawful for the Trump administration to issue a building permit for that pipeline without having undertaken a full environmental impact study. And the federal court in Montana has issued a federal injunction, two federal injunctions actually, against the Keystone XL pipeline, pointing out that it violates not only the National Environmental Protection Act, but also the Endangered Species Act. The Trump administration has appealed that to the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. The Trump administration asked the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals to set aside the injunction, even while the appeal is pending, and they refused to do so. So the Trump administration has now gone to the United States Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court has now extended its session for a whole week to further consider, among other things, this particular request on the part of the Trump administration to set aside that injunction and allow the TransCanada Oil Corporation to start building the pipeline through the Great Sioux Nation. So there's a high level of possibility that the 5-judge majority, that if the 4 reactionaries are joined by the other reactionary, that is Justice Roberts, Chief Justice Roberts, and he joins with them, setting aside that we're now advocating that the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals agree to come into an emergency session and hear the appeal of the Trump administration on an expedited basis and rule against them, so that they can reinstate the injunction if the Supreme Court sets it aside. So all of that is going on, the bookends, as it were, on both the western and eastern edges of the Great Sioux Nation, as Trump himself is at the heart of the Great Sioux Nation, standing at the base of a sacred mountain that's been defiled by the white culture by carving 4 gigantic faces of their own presidents into the side of that mountain. So that's what's going on tonight as we gather here this evening. And my objective in gathering with us is to try to help bring some clear order out of the apparent chaos. Not the chaos necessarily in the entire universe. As the background there of Sandy, you have that the great view of our universe over the shoulder of our planet, because those of us who are familiar with meditation and ancient ceremonies know that the universe is in order. It's inherently in order. It has its own balance and its own functioning natural laws. The chaos that we're talking about, having to try to overcome, is the chaos that is the disorder that is imposed upon our planet and in the affairs of man. And I use the term the affairs of man intentionally, because as we all know, the chaos that reigns not only from time to time in our human family, but pretty much consistently in our human family down through history, is being caused by the men who are insisting upon attempting to foist some completely artificial order upon the natural world, as in the words of Jackson Brown's song, trying to beat forge the beauty of our planet into power for themselves. This is what the major problem has been, and it's important to keep in mind now that this assertion of power on the part of men is always under the either the direct use of violence, physical violence against women and against other men who are not as inclined as they are to use physical violence, or under the threat of violence that they sort of choreograph, and they use in addition to threatening brute force against people to get their way and to assert their power. They also seem to think that not only are they physically more brutal than many other people, this percentage of the men on the planet think that they're smarter than everybody else, and that they think that they can utilize their perceived superior intelligence to manipulate other men, mostly other men, to talk these other men into participating with them in imposing this type of brute force on others, or threatening to do so in the form of major militaries or police forces that they organize, and very importantly, they have somehow manipulated everybody into sort of assuming that it's okay for them to possess what they refer to as qualified immunity, for that even when they exercise this violence completely erroneously, they still get away with it. That even if they attack an entire other country, for example, the W. Bush administration and Dick Cheney attacking all of Iraq on the theory that they were developing nuclear weapons. And even when they discovered that they were not doing that, they continued to occupy them. And it was all a ruse in order for them to gain access to and control over the oil in the Middle Eastern oil fields, which these same men think they own because they were able to set up false governments all through the Middle East after the World War I and appoint one tribe to be the king of this territory and then make a private contract with them to give them like 6% of the profits from the oil in that area. And yet the oil is owned by the 7 major oil corporations on the planet that are owned by these men. And so what I'm saying is that I want to raise the question of why would I be talking about this group of men, usually white men, Caucasian men from Western civilization for the most part, but there are also people in the East that do this. In Russia, it's clear that there's a very tiny minority of people who run the Communist Party there. Same thing is true in China, and it's now true in India. It's true in most of these places. There's a small percentage of these men who think they're smarter than everybody else, and they're more willing to exert brute force and violence against others in order to establish and to maintain their power. And the question is, why is it that the rest of us accept this? That somehow we acquiesce in the face of this bizarre assertion of power on the part of this tiny minority of less than 1%, even a fraction of 1% of the actual total population, that we in fact accept their domination because we're being bribed by these people. I mean, it's totally clear that they're bribing us by offering to us some share of the natural resources that they garner unto themselves, oftentimes taking it from us ourselves, but usually from other people, from indigenous people who live in areas of the planet where these men castigate them by saying that they're so primitive, they aren't actually developing their own natural resources. And so therefore, they don't have the right to self-govern in those areas. This was explicitly asserted by John W. Foster, who was the Secretary of State in 1893 when they went into the Hawaiian Islands and took over the Hawaiian Islands, actually said that the royal family there wasn't actually willing to develop their natural resources and make them available to the major corporations of the robber baron era. And so therefore they'd lost their right to govern that area of the world. Now, what I'm saying is that these men are offering to us here in the United States, with a population of only approximately 4% of the population in the entire world, that we're garnering unto ourselves over 50% of all of the natural resources that are developed every single year on the planet. And they're willing to share a portion of those with us so that we live lives that are actually better than most kings and queens of the Middle Ages. You know, we have electric lights, we have heat and air conditioning, we go to the refrigerator and open up the refrigerator and we have food from all portions of the world. You know, we push a button and we can sit and watch movies from around the world. And what they're doing is they're sharing those resources that they're able to take to give us a portion of those natural resources. And also, a second thing, they're bribing us into accepting their type of assertion of brute force or the threat of it over everyone else by offering us certain kind of additional luxuries through technology, which they develop because they think they're smarter than everybody else. And so what they do is they develop technology and they build bridges and highways and canals and airports and train stations and invent trains and things like that. And they say, look, we'll also provide for you this high level of technology that can cause you to ignore the natural forces of the world, ignore the change in climate and the change in temperatures. You know, you can fly from one place to another, you know, in a matter of hours. This is the so-called price of civilization, for us to be able to be bribed by access to all of these additional luxuries. And of course, there's a third thing that they're bribing us with, is the offer of our potential access to their group. That we're actually, it's possible for us to get access to their group, and if not us, at least our sons and some of our daughters, or perhaps our grandchildren. There's this constant promise being held out that if you'll just let us run everything for our own advantage, perhaps you and your children or your offspring will be part of us someday. And they recruit people from among ourselves in institutions like Harvard and Yale and Princeton and Columbia and Brown and to some significant lesser degree, Dartmouth. There are places like this where they recruit people to come into their ranks, and we're falling for it. Okay, and in that sense, we become complicit in this here in our country, and we know this. We know this. Now, why do I raise this here on this particular night, on the eve of the 4th of July here in the country, with a major presidential speech being made at the foot of a sacred mountain amidst the indigenous people of North America? Because right now, in my effort to try to bring some sense of order out of the chaos that seems to be afflicting our country right now, I want to do this because we seem at the present moment to be experiencing the highest degree of chaos that almost any of us have experienced in our lives, because most of the World War II generation who experienced, or the others who experienced World War I or the Great Depression or World War II, that terrible chaos that ensued around each of those three events, most of these people have passed from the scene right now. And even the oldest of us didn't experience it directly. And so that what we're experiencing right now seems to be the greatest degree of chaos that we have ever seen. And while it's not necessary for us to go into great detail about the various factors that go into making up this state of chaos at the present time, I want to touch on just a few of them, just for the sake of the record, that seem to be bringing about this state of chaos right now. The first and foremost, of course, is the 2016 designation by the Electoral College of Donald Trump to be president of the United States, despite the fact that the other candidate got over almost 3 million more votes than he did, that somehow he ends up being president of the United States. And the fact is that he got the nomination for one of the two parties by getting only 18 to 20% of the votes that were cast, even in the primary in that party. And yet that party, that political party, the Republican Party, had reconfigured the process by means of which they select their nominee to try to accelerate the rate at which they would pick a nominee, because they were convinced that the Democratic Party was going to be selecting Hillary Clinton, and that the Democratic National Committee would do anything necessary to suppress the challenge by Bernie Sanders or anybody that was more progressive than Hillary Clinton, who ended up who was the chair of the policy committee of the Democratic Leadership Conference. You know, this whole neoliberal, new, more moderate Democratic Party that had been instigated at the end of the Cold War by Richard Gebhardt and Bill Clinton and Hillary Clinton and others. That whole shift of the Democratic Party over to the right to follow the Republican Party, which virtually on the immediate eve of the termination of the Cold War, basically just retrenched back to the extreme right wing and started espousing all of the same values of the robber baron era that had preceded the 1917 revolution in Russia. That they went right back to extolling those types of values in asserting a new robber baron era. And we'll touch on that a little bit later, but this is one of the first in primary issues that has caused the confusion that has arisen, because the fact of the matter is that Donald J. Trump is clinically ill. You know, he actually suffers from acute narcissistic personality disorder. You know, and the fact of the matter is hundreds and hundreds of professional psychiatrists have all attested to this. This guy's a paradigmatic case of the paranoid narcissist. And it's almost spectacular in his qualities and characteristics. And yet the Democratic Party proved unable to unseat him, because they've established an order for their own benefit, for the benefit of the leaders of the Democratic and Republican Party, all of which I might point out, it's important to point out in case anybody hadn't known it. Now, over 51% of every single one of all of our elected representatives in Washington, D.C. are millionaires. Over 51% of the people in both houses are millionaires. And that these people have set up a system where they're so desperate to hold on to the control between the two of them, the two parties, that the Democratic Party will allow a basic mental moron like this to remain in power. And they'll wring their hands and they'll pace back and forth and express their despair over this whole thing, but they're so wedded to the structures and the institutions that they've set up to protect their own power that they won't challenge those. And they'll sit around waiting for another year almost with this guy in charge. And even though they have the 25th Amendment, even the 25th Amendment requires the signing off on the part of members of that guy's own political party. So that the third major structural source of the problem that we're dealing with here is the two-party political system. That we've established an institution where there's only two particular choices that you get, and that these two political parties have come to be absolutely dominated by the owners of corporate capital in the country. And now they've gotten control of the United States Supreme Court and most of the federal courts in the country. And so they've now actually litigated and established the fact that they're asserting these corporations are people. It's an exact same position that they took prior to 1934 that brought about the entire 1929 depression, because they had won the right with their corporate lawyers sitting on the benches that they appointed to declare these corporations, this private shareholder-owned corporation, to be a person, completely exonerating and immunizing the owners of the assets of the company from any personal liability, as well as their management and their board of directors. So this of course that's of course the fourth major structural source of the problem, which is the creation of these private shareholder-owned corporations and the establishment of this legal doctrine of them being the owners being completely immunized from any legal liability. And so what they've done is they have utilized that power to capture control of the two political parties, and that therefore everybody feels, all of us who are being threatened with violence, brute force violence, or being bribed into accepting their structures and systems, we acquiesce to being confronted every 4 years with a choice between just two people that have been selected by an extraordinary elite minority of our country to proffer to us. Okay, so this system right now is so bizarre that 90% of all of the elected officials in the Republican Party condone what Donald Trump is doing. They will not speak out against it. They'll never say anything contrary to what he says. No matter how bizarre what he says and does they just acquiesce to this because they're part of a structure of having to support that political party in order to get at the perks of being in political power, which the Republican and Democratic Party swap back and forth periodically as to who's going to be in charge of all the committees in Congress and getting access to all the pork, and so that all their people can become millionaires too while they're in the Congress. And very importantly, however, there's a fifth issue that's at stake here, and that is the fact that Donald Trump is a systematic liar. Now this becomes extraordinarily important because to actually assert that lying is completely accepted, this doesn't disqualify a person from being the president of the United States when he tells literally tens of thousands of lies all the time, dozens of lies a day, stands and looks at the cameras and just lies to everybody. And this is like Karl Rove on steroids. Karl Rove, that famous quote that he did with Ron Suskind when Ron Suskind was a Democratic operative, and Karl Rove said to him, the problem that you Democrats have is that you're still dealing with a fact-based reality. He actually said that to him, because the Republican Party can create its own reality. And now we have a person in the Republican Party that's at the head of our entire country who just asserts that he can just say anything he wants. He'll sit here with 50 or 60,000 people dying, all around him, saying we've got the coronavirus completely under control. And so I can go to a rally in South Dakota with tens of thousands of people, or 7,000, 8,000 people, without wearing masks, without social distancing, and it's perfectly okay. And so you don't have to worry, you're all right. And the fact is that Fox News exists, which is the sixth major institutional issue we have to deal with. Fox News, now owned by Rupert Murdoch, actually just proselytizes on behalf of these lies all day long. So it's an institutional structure that is in our country right now, where a significant majority of people between the East Coast and the West Coast, once you get east of the Appalachian Mountains and or west of the Appalachian Mountains and east of the Rocky Mountains, over 60% of all the people, wherever you go, are watching Fox News. It's on in restaurants, it's on in bars, it's on in barbershops, it's in hair salons, it's everywhere. It's in their airports, and they're just being doused with this, right? And the structure that we have in place doesn't seem to be able to do anything about that. What they've done, of course, is they've fielded their own Fox News of the progressives, which is MSNBC. I mean, and I get really uncomfortable watching MSNBC because just watch virtually every single program you see. The person who is the newscaster will ask a question of their guest, and the guest will sit there and wait for the question to be all done, and they'll say, "Yes, that's exactly right. What you've just said in your question is exactly right. Yes, I agree with you." And every single one of the people they call on to talk is in complete agreement with the narrator, who is espousing an editorial line. Now, the fact is, we may happen to agree with their editorial line, and we think that's cool. But the same thing is true for Fox. Fox News just has people on who all espouse the same thing. So the reason I'm pointing this out is because what I'm pointing out is a number of institutional structures that are in place right now, which all feed into this chaos. Because the lack of being able to trust sources of information when you're being lied to by people in positions of authority, and you have a state-run school system which is raising up children to believe the statements made by people that are in positions of authority, all the way from their teachers to their principals, to the local police, to the governors and the elected officials, and you have these people lying systematically. And you have news programs on that are all skewering the truth. They're editorializing all the time. It's hard to get any kind of objective. Take for example this thing with the report that depends how they put it, that Putin is personally putting out bounties to the Taliban to murder American soldiers. You know. And you say, wait a second, I've listened to all this. Did he really do that? What's the proof that he did that? And they say, oh, well, there was a source. They've got a source this in the Taliban who said that. Oh, really? And they back it up by saying, well, now they've got bank records showing that money from Russia is going to the Taliban. That doesn't prove that they're putting bounties on our soldiers. And then they also say, well, they're giving weapons to the Taliban. Well, the fact is, our country was shipping weapons over to the Mujahideen when the Russians invaded Afghanistan. And we were more than just paying money to them to kill Russian soldiers. You know, I was personally involved. I had one of my investigators, Gene Wheaton, who had to have known the president of Pakistan, who was transferring the weapons to them, was asked by Oliver North to go over there, and General Zia got angry because he was stealing part of the weapons. The whole setup was, back during Iran-Contra, is Oliver North and the people in the National Security Council were giving brand new weapons to President Zia of Pakistan. And then the understanding was President Zia would give the old weapons to the Mujahideen so that they could fight and kill the Russian soldiers that had invaded Afghanistan. And President Zia was stealing a certain percentage of all of those weapons. And Oliver North found out about it, and he called Zia a fucking thief. And Zia found out about it, and he got really angry, and he said, well, fuck you, in Persian or something. He said, but he said it, and he said, and so I'm going to stop giving you the weapons. And so Oliver North reached out to one of my investigators, Eugene Wheaton, the former chief of security of the U.S. military mission in Tehran, and a fluent Farsi speaker who knew General Zia, and asked him to go over to apologize for Oliver North so they could reopen the supply of military equipment to the Mujahideen to kill Russian soldiers. And now here's both in the Democratic Party, people now are strutting around, you know, completely offended, going, oh, this is absolutely totally outrageous. We've got proof that the Russian government is actually giving weapons to the Taliban, like as if we didn't do that all the time. It's just like them hollering and screaming about the Russians, you know, sending all these emails into our people up in in Minnesota, in Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania during our elections. Well, we're pouring Radio Free Europe all into Russia, and we're actually sending in Roger Ailes to be the campaign chairman in Nicaragua for Chamorro against Danny Ortega. This is so totally hypocritical that it's very difficult for anybody who has a political IQ above room temperature to really have any kind of sense of integrity of the information that's flowing around here. And of course, if people are not well informed in the political realities, they don't know what to think. And so our people are extraordinarily confused in this era. And then on top of that, of course, comes the coronavirus pandemic. and all of a sudden, everybody's directed to stay in their house and can't go to work, and they can't earn a living, and they don't know what they're doing. And then you have this extraordinary lockdown that takes place around the country. And then you have the two-party system, Republicans and Democrats, divide on this issue. And all the right-wing Republicans start telling everybody that this is a big hoax, that this is going to go away all by itself. It's no worse than the flu. And even when they're demonstrably shown to be wrong about that, with 130,000 people dead in our country from this, they continue with the same line. So that this is all proving to be extremely confusing, because there's this extraordinary binary split inside our country right now, with the people lining up on the blue team and the red team. And neither one of them are believing the other. And the red team is believing anything that Fox News and Trump says, and the blue team is believing anything that MSNBC and CNN say. And now, on top of that, you have the murder of George Floyd and the Black Lives Matter issue, where we actually see people in the streets burning down police stations. And you find people across the country cheering for them burning down police stations, and other people calling to, literally some people to disband the police departments entirely. Let's just get rid of them, And then the Democratic Party comes rushing back in saying, wait a second, we're not in favor of getting rid of them. We're in favor of cutting back on their budgets and transferring that money into other social services that can relieve our honorable police department, 99% of whom are all really good guys. I mean, half of them are sociopaths. I mean, they're all recruited from the bullies in the local schools at the police department people. I've lived with them. I mean, I grew up among them. I know what's going on there. And then they recruit guys that come back from the military into the police departments who are trained killers, who have been taken to boot camp and they've been thrashed for weeks on end to learn how to become killers, to assert physical violence against other people whom they target as their adversaries. And then they recruit them to the police department. So that so some of the people in the country are so upset about all of this, they're proposing disbanding the entire police departments. So you can understand why people are so confused. And then you have, of course, Donald Trump deploying the United States military against demonstrators in Lafayette Park. He deploys the United States military against them, and then lies and says, oh, they didn't really use any rubber bullets. They never used any tear gas. And there's all the video showing that they did. And so the reason that I'm raising all of these things is because we're at a stage right now where the Attorney General of the entire United States is doing things like ordering the release of friends of Trump, this guy Michael Flynn, who was his national security advisor, ordering him to be released from custody and dropping all the charges against him, even after he's confessed to criminal activity, because he's a friend of the president's. And he's intervening. He's intervening to lower the sentence for Roger Stone, his other friend. He's actually been shown now to try to have intervened with the U.S. attorneys in the Southern District of New York to not prosecute Michael Cohen. And he's fired now the United States Attorney in the Southern District, and just yesterday fired the United States Attorney in the Eastern District of New York. And he's fired the U.S. Attorney in Washington D.C. just to get rid of them, like he's a tin horn dictator somewhere. And still, the Democratic Party keeps saying, well, what we got to do is vote against him next time. We'll vote against him 120 days from now. And then he has also from November 4th all the way to January 20th, another 2 months or something, where he can appoint tons of federal judges, have the Republicans in the Senate, in the Judiciary Committee, put the rest of those judges in, even after he's lost, and yet the system is in place now where all of that can happen. And so the country is in a state where a significant number of people seem to be on the brink of despairing. Not only despairing about being able to tell what's true, but despairing about thinking that there's anything they can do to solve it. And the Democratic Party is offering them the option of electing Joe Biden, who his whole campaign promise is he'll get things back to normal. Back to normal, like they were when people thought that Hillary Clinton was going to get elected, who's giving $250,000 speeches to the Goldman Sachs behind closed doors and telling Goldman Sachs that she'll put them in charge of running the economy if she gets in, and this is the bring everything back to normal. And we know perfectly well that the Democratic National Committee did everything in their power, again, to torpedo the candidacy of Bernie Sanders inside the Democratic Party. And that there's not any realistic chance that he's going to, how about this, that he gets to choose whoever is going to be his vice president. He just gets to choose that person, flip a coin, interview them all, see if he likes their smile, and that we have set up a system now where the one person who gets nominated by one of these two parties gets to just pick who his vice president is going to be, ostensibly to be the next president of the United States, and everybody's sitting around cheering and playing games as to, well, who do you think he's going to pick? You think he's really going to pick a woman this time? You think he's really going to pick a black woman this time? Which black woman do you think he's going to pick this time? Like we're all sitting in some kind of fiefdom, where there's some sort of lord of the manor that we're just waiting to see what his mood is today. So my objective here is to try to bring some sort of a sense of coherent order to understanding what's really going on now, so that our people will have a sense of a clear, structured understanding of what it is that's really going on right now and what it is that we can do together to deal with it. And I want to context this in the fact that when Franklin Delano Roosevelt was elected in 1932, the country was in terrible shape like this. You had a president with Herbert Hoover who used to say things like, oh, I was walking down the street by the White House today and I saw a man in the street selling apples on the street. There must be good money in selling apples. That was one of his famous kind of observations. What I'm saying is that's similar to the kind of things that Donald Trump says, and so the Republican Party, under the control of the major corporate executives back in the dawn of the Depression, back in 1929, were completely out of touch with any reality as it affected most normal people. They had policies in their corporations that caused people to have to work, 7-year-old kids having to work 7 days a week, 12 hours a day in the mines. They had people living in little communities. You all know this, where they didn't get paid with real money. They got paid with script, which could only be taken to the country store to get things they needed that was owned by the company, the coal company. You know, this is what these men will do if you allow them free rein. And they've demonstrated this over and over again. And Franklin Roosevelt talked about this when he came to office in his inaugural speech in 1932, his State of the Union address, his later inaugural address in Madison Square Garden. He talked about these people. He said, "Look, we're talking about a very small percentage, 0.1% of the people in the country who own overwhelming portions of the resources of our country. And we've got to do something about this." And so he set about establishing the New Deal to confront the economic catastrophe that had been imposed upon the country and the world by this small cadre of men. And I'm suggesting that we have to do something similar. We need to look to that period when Franklin Roosevelt came to office, the kind of things that he did, the things that worked, the things that didn't work, the kinds of coalitions that he put together to try to move against this element in our country, and what he did about all that. Now, I hasten to point out that even though I personally like Joe Biden, I've been to dinner with Joe Biden. I know his son Hunter. His son Hunter, I've mentioned to you before, was in the Jesuit Volunteer Corps when I was legal counsel for the Jesuit headquarters, National Office of Social Ministry in Washington, D.C. And so I like Joe. I briefed him on the Iran-Contra thing. I briefed him when he was the chair of the Senate Judiciary Committee and when he was chair of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. So I know him. And, to coin a phrase, he ain't no Franklin Roosevelt. Okay? He's a nice person, but he's not a Franklin Roosevelt. And so that the argument that they're making on his behalf, like the Raging Cajun, James Carville, saying things like, you gotta be clear. You gotta be clear. He's going to have a more progressive set of policies than any Democratic president in history. But those are not adequate. We know they're not adequate. We know that the regular Democratic National Committee and the people and the candidates are so beholden to the oil corporations and to big pharma and to the major financial institutions to help finance their campaigns that they're not going to do what is necessary. They're just not. It's very similar to what Greta Thunberg said about global climate change. That she said at the 40th gathering of the international community to try to deal with global climate change. She said to them, look, as long as all you're talking about is how you can do what is politically feasible right now, rather than talking about what has to be done to stop climate change, my whole generation will have no hope at all. Okay? And so we're faced with that kind of a situation right now. As long as the Democratic Party is only talking about getting back to normal, rather than doing what's necessary to come to grips with global climate change, what's necessary to come to grips with the control of our public policies, both domestic and foreign, by this tiny elite cadre of men who seize and hold control over the instrumentalities of violence in our culture, that people are going to feel that they're without hope. And so one of our major tasks here, even though it's a small group of us, we have to start figuring out how to restore hope to the people in our country. What concrete positive things can we do to bring hope back to our people? And what I want to do is, over the next number of meetings, to make it clear, to convince all of you and all of your friends whom you can persuade to come and listen over the next 100 days, or out of the 120 up to this election, that this is not too much for us to be able to overcome. In the same way that the Great Depression of 1929 was not too much to overcome if we can all work together and mobilize our people. Indeed, that I hope to be able to convince you that we can transform what on the face of it is a calamity, a catastrophe right now, can actually be an opportunity that will enable us to make more progressive change than would have been possible had Hillary Clinton actually been elected back in 2016. Okay, so what I want to do to talk about how this elite group has functioned over the years in our country, how we can, through the passing of the California Green New Deal, the structuring of the Green New Deal, which I'm talking about virtually every day. You know, I've told you before, we've got a 350-page draft of this bill now. We've got a 50-page summary of it, which we can get for you, and a 4-page executive summary. And what we're doing is we're reaching out to not only the experts, the policy experts, in each of the 13 different subject matter areas of the bill, but also to people that are on the ground doing the kind of work in this field, that have been doing the work in this field, that know what it is, what the challenges are that we have to overcome. But as we had the discussion this morning in our senior staff meeting, you know, there's got to be a there. There's got to be some specific thing that we're talking about here. It's not just, we want to get to net neutrality on carbon emissions by 2030. Everybody says, okay, good, yeah, that's a good idea. But how are you going to do that? How does that relate to electric cars? How does that relate to the state financing of electric charging stations? How does that relate to the kind of carbon emissions that are going to be allowed to be emitted by major corporations? How does that relate to the governor continuing to authorize fracking? You know, the head of the Democratic Party in California authorizing more fracking. What do we do about that? Who are the people within the present structure who can do something about this? Who are the ones who have to be replaced by someone else? This is the work that we're going to be doing. And what I want to be able to do is to set the larger context for this, to be able to convince you that we can do this, that it has been done in the past. We can learn some of the lessons from the past, but we have to be able to create new solutions to these things, and that we're prepared to do this together, okay? And to not believe that just a group of us, you know, here in Central California are not able to do this. As I've said to you before, you know, I've sat in a room with only 5 people who we said we're going to shut down the construction of all private nuclear power plants in the United States. And everybody thought that we were completely daffy to be able to do that. So we had to figure out how to do it, what kind of investigation to conduct, what kind of litigation to conduct, what kind of moves we had to make inside Congress, et cetera, okay? What we had to threaten to reveal to the country in order to get them to back off from what they were doing. So in the same way with Iran-Contra, we said, we're going to cut off the supply of weapons to the Contras, you know, from the Reagan-Bush administration. And everybody thought that we were crazy. And there were 5 of us in the room at that time too. And so what I'm saying is we can mobilize to actually craft a Green New Deal, organize around the Green New Deal, educate our people about the Green New Deal, get the Green New Deal passed and put into place in California to stand as the bellwether for the rest of the country. Okay? And so that's what I'm proposing that we do together. It's sort of an extended workshop that we have here. But as I say, since we don't get to do the course up at UCSC here with the virus, we can do this. But what I would recommend this for homework. I would suggest that you go to they've got a site, my office has got a site called danielpsheehan.com. Okay, danielpsheehan.com. And it's got a thing you can click on that says courses. And you can see the course lectures that are there, some of which I've discussed some of these things, not in the narrow focus of the Green New Deal, but in general. And so that I would want you to go and do that. You know, just give up one particular movie on Netflix, or Amazon Prime, or you don't have to stop watching Rachel Maddow or Brian Williams or any of the others. That I would propose you watching Rulers of the Realm, those lectures, and the ones right before it, because they're going to be talking about a lot of these 25 to 30 men who over each generation have risen to the power of dominating and controlling our foreign policy and our domestic policies, so that you'll see what we're dealing with here. And we'll have to then try to figure out who it is that exists in this particular generation that we're going to have to deal with. Okay?
Thank you,
So
Danny.